The Owl House is a wonderfully weird show full of insane world building, magic, humor, and of course an amazing cast of characters. Between Luz and the rest of her friends, the show has had some pretty lovable heroes. But you know what they say, a hero is only as good as their villain. So, who is the best villain in the Owl House? There have been a ton of captivating villains throughout the series. Some like Emperor Belos are cold, cunning, and genuinely terrifying, while others begin as antagonists and go on incredible redemption arcs. But do characters like Hunter or Lilith really count as villains? Is the Collector better than Belos? Is Hooty secretly the big bad plotting to destroy all of the Boiling Isles? Probably not. I'm Scrolls, and today I'll be answering those questions and more, dissecting what makes the Owl House's evildoers so great or not so great. And I'll be ranking them on this handy dandy tier list. And by the end, using the power of overanalyzation and my subjective opinions, I'll explain who the darkest, evilest, most vile villains are and who reigns supreme. And yeah, I know it's been a while since I posted, and this is not really what I usually covered in the past, but shh. I've decided to expand my scope of analyzing more than just Blockman roleplays, and onto the worlds of cartoons like Owl House, and maybe more. So if you end up enjoying this video, maybe subscribe, smash the like button, or drop a suggestion for what show or franchise or video game I should overanalyze next. But now, it's time for villainy. I'm going to break down this video in a few segments. First, I'll be discussing the major dynamic villains, ones who have gone through redemption arcs such as Amity, Lilith, and Hunter. Then, I'll quickly be sorting through some of the smaller villains like Boscha, Tibbles, and others. After that, I've got a few words to share on one terrible mom. And lastly, it's on to the biggest bads, Belos and the Collector. But what makes a villain? For me, I would say a villain is an antagonist with evil motives, intentions, or dastardly effects on the world. When ranking the villains of Owl House, I'll be looking at 5 different qualities that make the best villain in my opinion. I won't tally any points or do anything that meticulous, but I'll just be looking at these 5 aspects throughout the show. Efficiency is all about how well they were able to achieve their goals. Are they a genuine threat, or just a bumbling idiot? Memorability is about their design, their powers, their personality. Do they stick out? Importance, like how significant were they to the fate of our heroes and the overarching narrative? For complexities, I'll be looking at their motivations, their identity, how their actions complicate our understanding of the Boiling Isles or the show's themes. And evilness, are they heartless, terrifying, willing to kill puppies and punch babies to achieve their personal beliefs, or out of sheer boredom? Now that I've explained the criteria, let's dive in. Redeemed villains. Enemies to lovers, enemies to homies, enemies to your weird dorky goth aunt, Lilith. Let's talk about redemption and reformed villains. One of the best parts of the Owl House is how it handles character arcs. Amity, Hunter, and Lilith especially have such fascinating developments throughout the show. But if they begin as antagonists and emerge at the end of the series as good guys, can they really be ranked as villains? I think so. For this tier list, I'll be focusing on their effectiveness and threat when they were still playing the role of a villain, but I'll also be considering the overall impact they have on the show. Let's start with Mittens, aka Amity Blight. She starts off as a condescending snob, but her stint as a villain opposing Luz, Willow, and Gus is pretty brief. She only really acts as a villain in 2 episodes, I Was a Teenage Abomination and Convention. And in both these episodes, she's more mean-spirited rather than straight-up villainous. When we get to know her character more later on and find out about the pressure she gets from her family, she becomes much more sympathetic. So while she's an amazing character, she's not a top villain. However, she is pretty memorable as one of the reformed villains, and her arc going from despising to loving Luz is pretty amazing. I'm placing Amity at a solid C tier. Then we have Lilith Clawthorne, who acted as a villain throughout much of Season 1. Since her debut, she was presented as a skilled magic user, someone with enough power to rival her sister Ida. We get some of the best battle scenes out of her going against Ida, and she is genuinely intimidating. The fact that she fails to capture Ida time and time again, however, does kind of lower how high we could rank her because of her inefficiency. However, I think that once we discover more of her backstory later in the show, the reason why she fails to capture her sister actually makes much sense. Lilith wants to capture her, but so that she can help her get rid of the curse. She wants to force her into a coven to be cured because it's all Lilith's fault that this happened. She isn't necessarily evil, but she's willing to do some evil things all for the sake of curing Ida. Look at the episode Agony of the Witch. She's become so deluded by Belos' promises and her own guilt for cursing her sister, she's willing to endanger and almost kill Luz, an innocent child. She's a villain at this moment, but one with complex motivations, and it's truly chilling when we find out that she was the one to curse Ida. While she eventually changes her ways and makes the ultimate sacrifice, sharing Ida's curse, her Season 1 run as an antagonist is angsty and intense, and all in all, after seeing the extreme lengths she goes to follow the Emperor, and the height of her magical ability, I'm placing her at an A tier. She's a pretty great villain. Next is Hunter, the latest cloned Golden Guard, former right-hand man of Belos. He's fast, cocky, yet anxious and overlooked, both a prodigy and an underdog. And as Season 2 goes on, we watch him grow more and more desperate and fearful of Belos, until he realizes that Belos has been manipulating him and a long line of other artificially cloned Golden Guards in the past. Poor kiddo. He shows up in several episodes and is a genuine threat. In separate tides, he overpowers Ida and Luz, then threatens to kill King, and manages to force Ida and Luz to kill the Selkidamis, or at least pretend to. He's able to boss around the Blights and Kikimora and hunt down the Palisman, but while he's evil, we also see that it comes from a place of being lied to and not wanting to fail the only family he thinks he has, Belos. He's a complicated villain, a deadly foe, but also just a young kid, and parts of him shatter as the series goes on. Then we see his utter desperation in Season 2, Episode 8, Eclipse Lake. He's having a full-out mental breakdown, realizing there's no Titan's blood at the lake, and for a moment he's willing to dig his own grave. And when Amity tries to show kindness towards him, he goes feral, seeing the portal key around her neck and fighting fiercely. And man, although he has no natural magic, he's a competent opponent, able to outplay Amity and steal the portal key. By the end, when he's redeemed and joins the good side, we've seen a full arc of his villainy and his longing for people who care about him. Altogether, his era as a villain is one that brings a lot of action and drama to the show. His banter and interactions with Luz, Amity, and Ida are entertaining to watch, and he pushes the plot forward in our understanding of Belos' evil. For all of this, I'm placing him at an A tier. After those three, there's actually two other villainous characters that also sort of have redemption arcs that I want to touch on. Firstly, Kikimora. Kikimora doesn't really have a full redemption arc, but in King's Tide she does give up on Belos and help King find and unleash the Collector. She's a maniacal, tiny demon with evil, vengeful plans, and while she kind of fails over and over, I still find her design and over-the-top personality to be pretty memorable. And she could be genuinely quite threatening sometimes, able to scheme and dish out aggressive magical barrages. Plus, her jealousy of the Golden Guard does create some pretty fun heat within the Emperor's Coven, and allows us to watch Hunter's arc develop more as he crosses paths with Luz and Amity because of Kikimora's actions. I think she deserves at least a B tier. And you know who else is a villain with a redemption arc? Maybe one of my favorite sort of villains, the Owl Beast, aka the manifestation of Ida's curse. The Owl Beast is savage, a giant creature that hunts Ida in her mind and merges with her body. It's a monstrous beast, but it and the actual curse can be interpreted as a metaphor for chronic illness, mental or physical. I think it would have been so easy to keep Ida as just this silly witch aunt mom with a wacky werewolf-esque curse. However, the Owl Beast and the ways Ida must deal with it truly challenge her and complicate the story as Luz and the rest of the gang must deal with the beast coming out time and time again. And using the Owl Curse as an allegory for a real-life issue makes it such a nuanced antagonistic force. We also have Ida's stunning dream sequence in the episode Knock Knock Knocking on Hooty's Door, where she finally confronts the beast and makes a compromise with it. It's a ravaging beast, but it's also acting villainous out of fear, in a way just like Ida. We get this gorgeous scene of the two coming to terms with each other, and Ida unlocks her badass harpy form. But this video isn't about happy moments, it's about evil. So, as an antagonistic force, the Owl Beast and the Curse are highly effective, able to really mess up our protagonists' lives. They are memorable, look at the design, it's iconic, really screams murder monster, complex, and important to Ida's character. It deserves to perch at A tier. Now that we've discussed all these beautifully developed, redeemed villains, let's discuss all these wacky minor villains. There are a lot of miscellaneous baddies and monsters who have stood as antagonists in the show. I won't be going in depth on all of them, except for a few. For ease of rateability, I'll be grouping these villains into categories. The first group are villains who are kind of evil in a generic way. Generic evil. They're usually one episode antagonists who might be entertaining and probably have some funny lines here and there, but overall, aren't too significant and aren't that threatening. Some examples are Adagist, the Demon Hunters, or Tibbles. And there's also the Emperor's Coven as an entity with all its soldiers and generals, which I'll be representing with their symbol. To be honest, they aren't effective as villains and are pretty bumbling. Altogether, I'm gonna stick these generic evils in the E tier. And then there's also the Merchant, who really thought he could take on 2 Clawthorn sisters. For his utter stupidity, he gets his own tier to himself to think about the stupid mistakes he's made. F tier. A step above generic evil is what I call Evil Plus. These characters are probably not that complex yet, just doing evil because they're evil, or because they're demon creatures who are naturally violent. However, compared to the earlier villains, I think these guys are actually somewhat effective. They might be more threatening, more dangerous, or have more interesting designs, or might even actually succeed in defeating the heroes in some way. They get seats at the D tier. An example of Evil Plus is Piniet the Publisher Demon. He actually escaped pretty much unscathed, continuing his evil publishing methods. And then there's Grom, aka Grometheus, the Fear Bringer. While Grom does kind of get easily destroyed in the end by 2 dancing teen witches, it's a genuinely terrifying foe, able to shapeshift into any fear. So the villains in Evil Plus are actual threats, but they might lack greater importance or memorability compared to major villains. I'll be placing Evil Plus in the D tier. Hey, it's better than F. Next are the foil characters, Boscha and Ptolemy. I'm placing them at C tier. While Boscha hasn't had much character development, I think that's part of her charm. As a plain old high school bully, she's pretty effective. The level of seriousness she brings to her sports makes her an impressive foe, and although she seems kind of generic, I think her character is valuable because it highlights what could have happened to Amity if she didn't meet and befriend Luz. If Amity had never met Luz, she would have continued being a snobbish bully. Boscha's role as a villain is to infuriate us, but also to remind us of Amity's past. Similarly, Ptolemy acts as an interesting foil to Gus. Like Gus, he's younger, interested in humans, and doesn't exactly fit in. While he's not that villainous, his character really pushes Gus through more development, and I appreciate the pressure that he brings on Gus to make him a better hero in the end. He's also a redeemed villain, since he and Gus become friends by the end of Through the Looking Glass Ruins. And for our last category of minor villains, I have the fascinating minor anti-villains group, with Bat Queen and Inner Willow. They aren't really evil, but they still oppose the protagonist of the show in an episode, pursuing honorable goals in a destructive way. Bat Queen pushed Luz through trials because Luz was acting irresponsible with Albert, and we see a hint of all the pain the Bat Queen has been through, being an abandoned palisman. She's seen as a threatening force on the Isles, despite her good intentions. All this plus a very unique design makes her pretty memorable as an anti-villain. Same with Inner Willow, who's intense and fiery and intimidating, fueled by anger at Amity's past actions. Inner Willow is such a cool way of representing the darker side of Willow and making teenage angst tangible and threatening. I'm placing these last 2 at B tier. Now, for the Blight parents. The Blight parents are definitely antagonists, and it might seem clear-cut to place a Karen like Odalia at the top of the most evil characters, but we have to really consider her involvement in the series for a moment. And is Alador really a villain, or is he just an antagonist? Aren't Em and Ed antagonists too? Are all the Blight's evil villains, and where do they rank? Tell me, Scrolls! Alright, so many questions. Calm down, my dear viewer. I'm gonna shed some Blight on this dark topic right now. While Ed and Em are pretty mischievous and act as antagonistic forces in the episode Lost in Language, they haven't done anything that is really villainous. Threatening to spread Amity's diary across the whole school is pretty messed up, but overall, throughout the series, I wouldn't consider them villainous enough to make it to this tier list. They're usually just chaotic good or neutral. Sorry guys. Meanwhile, Odalia is truly villainous. Greedy, manipulative, and downright abusive, willing to attack children with magical weapons just to entertain some rowdy investors. Clearly, she checks the evilness category. She's a truly frustrating villain, and kind of reminds me of Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter series. Yeah, she's that bad. I guess one argument against placing her too high as a villain is that we don't actually see much of her. She's only prominently featured in 2 episodes, except for a few flashback appearances in other episodes. It would have been nicer to see more of her, and maybe more character development, especially before we see Alador finally stand up to her. When we finally see Alador stand up to her in Clouds on the Horizon, it's not as satisfying as it could have been. We only see one side of her in these episodes, the evil businesswoman / mom side. But while what we do see from her is kind of just plain evil, she is important and memorable in relation to Amity. Through her personality and actions, we can understand why Amity acts so cruel in the beginning of the series. And not every villain needs to be redeemed. Some people are just plain terrible, and Odalia may just as well be one of those characters meant to inspire rage. Taking all this into account, I don't think I'd place her at an A tier, but instead let's leave her at a B tier. And the last Blight I haven't mentioned is Alador. He's not a great dad for letting Odalia treat her kids so terribly. He does have some righteous moments where he supports Amity and stands up to Odalia, eventually trying to fix his relationship with his kids, but when he is playing a more antagonistic role, he mostly just serves as comic relief or to stop his wife from going too far. I won't be placing him too high on this list. Maybe around E tier for When put in comparison with someone like Odalia, he doesn't seem that evil. Okay, that's enough about the Blights. Let's talk about this crusty old man, Belos. Emperor Belos, Phillip Woodabane, the Bonehead himself. Something I like about Belos is that we've seen him in so many forms. As a psycho little inner mind child, as a human, a preacher, a tyrant, an uncle, and a total monster. He's got a lot of facets to his identity that make him so fascinating, and is able to act so villainous and intimidating in so many ways. I'm glad that he's the main bad guy of the series, because he's actually scary, competent, and intriguing. He's used his charisma and stage presence time and time again to brainwash characters like Hunter, Lilith, and most of the Boiling Isles. He acts so ruthlessly to achieve his goals. Even as Phillip, he was able to easily trick Luz into helping him gain the Collector's tablet. What's even worse about Belos is that his evil is one that feels real. He's a bigoted manipulator who uses people like pawns in his goals. Sounds like your everyday corrupted CEO or politician. And the fact that he lies to the Boiling Isles, saying that he hears the Titan's voice, creating this whole cult or religion around him, and the coven system is so messed up and deranged. Yet this manipulation of faith and religion is a type of evil we've seen happen throughout history. And through it all, he uses the excuse that he's trying to save humanity. He thinks the ends justify the means no matter what kind of cruelties and horrors he does. And at the same time, he's still human. He gets cocky, but he also gets anxious, worrying about what the human world is like after all these years. He doesn't think he's evil, simply protecting humanity. He even offers to help Luz return to the human realm. He's a villain that feels real, feels human, yet is also so monstrous. To stay alive and achieve his long-term goals of destroying wild magic, he consumes the souls of helpless little palisman creatures. No, these poor babies. And in King's Tide, we see him get consumed by this palisman ailment, transforming him into a disturbing, bestial form. Overall, Belos, Phillip, whatever you call him, he's one of the best villains in the Owl House, and maybe even one of the best in all cartoons. He has a complex set of motivations, a chilling personality, and is all around a nightmare. I'm placing him at the top, the S tier, because he's like the most powerful dude on the Boiling Isles, and who could stop him? Absolutely no. Oh. Oops. And now for the moment you've been waiting for, the horrifying, terrifying, Belos-splatting, pajama-wearing, eldritch iPad kid from beyond the stars. It's the Collector. I, like many people, love the Collector. A playful child with unhinged godly powers? Crazy. And I can't wait to see how Luz and the rest of the gang stand up against their reign. But does he deserve to be the big bad of Season 3? Does he get to beat Belos on this tier list just like he beat him in the show? I mean, we've seen so little of the Collector so far, but he clearly is the most powerful character yet. We haven't even seen the full extent of his abilities or the destruction he creates on the Boiling Isles. We've only seen just the smallest specks of his power and chaos, and man, it is terrifying. In the end, he was able to stop the draining spell, but he splatters Belos, spreading fear amongst the gang and the audience, and he could arrange the world to his liking. From what we've seen so far, he's powerful and effective, albeit a bit gullible. But is he evil? I would say yes. He scales high on the evilness meter. You might say, but he's just a little kid, he doesn't know what he's doing, but I shake my head at that. No, kids are evil. Kids are some of the most evil things in the world. Look into his eyes. Okay, seriously though, it is tricky to rate his evilness when he seems to have an immature, childish mind, acting out of boredom and without logic. However, this ignorance of right and wrong, good and evil, still leads to reckless destruction when paired with his immense cosmic power. I think this still qualifies him as a villain. Speaking of immense power, something fascinating about the Collector is that they represent some of the key ideas that Belos opposed. Belos wanted to constrict and control the Isles, and carefully clamp down on wild magic. Meanwhile, the Collector is this unhinged kiddo who uses magic in whatever way he wants. Belos represents extreme tyrannical order, and with the Collector we might be seeing a lot of unbridled, childish anarchy. And there's more to this character than just being a powerful child. We get hints that he's from beyond the stars, and that he was trapped by the Titan itself. The Collector's got some deep lore that we're surely going to dive into in Season 3. While I'm excited to see what the Collector does in Season 3, I wouldn't say that they are a better villain than Belos, yet. Belos has proven himself time and time again to be threatening and truly evil. While he was defeated by the Collector pretty easily, he still probably survived with that ounce of goo. And we just haven't seen enough of the Collector to make a judgment on how effective of a villain he is. At that same time though, the mystery of the Collector is so intriguing. The sheer horror of a child having that much eldritch power? It's so fascinating. How will they be stopped? And what will they actually do to our heroes and their home on the Boiling Isles? I'm placing the Collector at the S tier because of their intrigue, complexity, and also by how memorable and important they are to the ending of the Owl House. Even though their physical form has only appeared in one episode, they've taken the fandom by storm. They'll definitely be an entertaining villain to watch in the finale of the Owl House. But wait, there's still one more villain I have to mention. There's one true villain in the Boiling Isles that stands above the rest. No, it's not Belos, not the Collector, not even Hooty. The most vile, atrocious, dastardly, despicable entity to touch this beautiful show that is known as the Owl House is... Well, hope you enjoyed me rambling about Owl House villains. Comment down below who your favorite villain in the Owl House is. And I want to hear, what should I analyze next? That's it. Bye!